Hey guys, we have 2 chapters left and we are on chapter 14. The last one is 15, yep. And chapter 14 is called Inside Nick. On the outside, Nick was still Nick, but inside it was different. Oh sure, he had a lot of great ideas, but now they scared him a little. For instance, Nick learned in social studies class that people who buy stuff are called consumers. If consumers stop buying, stores and shops and restaurants go out of business. Then, boom, a new idea hit him. All the kids loved lunchtime, but the awful part about lunch was the eating part, school food. And the food was never a surprise. You had to smell it all morning and then get to eat it. The food was always bad. Well, thought Nick, the school cafeteria is sort of a restaurant, isn't it? And the students are the consumers, right? And we don't really have to buy our lunches there, do we? Nick could see it all. He would get all the kids to bring their lunches from home every day until the lunch ladies who made their lunches cooked better food. He was sure those women didn't cook food like that for their own families. The kids were the consumers with $1.35 in their pockets. Until the food was better, that's where the money would stay. Great idea. Nick was sure it would work. He got all excited about it. But then Nick remembered what happened with Frindle, and it stopped him cold. He was sure that if the kids stopped buying lunch, sooner or later somebody would figure out it was all Nick Allen's idea. He would get in trouble. People would write about it in the newspaper. The principal would call his parents. Anything could happen. So for the first time in his life, Nick kept a good idea to himself. He never even told John or Chris. And that changed Nick. His mom was the first to notice. "Are things okay at school, honey?" She asked one day early March. He had seemed kind of down, a little sad. It worried her. "Sure," said Nick. "Everything's fine." "Is everything okay with your friends? They haven't been hanging around here very much." "Mom, honest, everything's fine. It's winter. Everyone's really busy with hockey and basketball, that's all." And Nick went to his room and shut the door. Mrs. Granger noticed the change too. The clever little rascal who looked her in the eye and said, But I really didn't have a Frindle with me." That boy wasn't in her class anymore. Now a quieter, more careful Nicholas Allen came to class every day. He did all his work perfectly, he didn't speak unless she called on him, and he didn't laugh and joke with his friends like he used to. School would be over in a few months, and it seemed like there was nothing she could do to help him. Toward the end of the year, Nick remembered the letter that Mrs. Granger had asked him to sign on the back when the Frindle business was just getting started. The chess game was over, so he was expecting to get that letter from Mrs. Granger any day. But all spring it didn't come, so he thought she must have forgotten about it. Nick was afraid to bring it up again, but he was dying of curiosity. So on the last day of school, Nick knocked on Mrs. Granger's classroom door. She was straightening up the textbooks on the bookcases below the windows. Without turning around, she sang out, "Come in." Nick said, "Hi, Mrs. Granger." Mrs. Granger stood and turned to face him. "Oh, it's you, Nicholas. I'm so glad you stopped by. I've been meaning to talk to you, and this will save me from having to send you a letter this summer." Nick gulped and said, "That's what I came here for, the letter." Mrs. Granger looked puzzled for half a second, and then she said, "Oh, that letter." Then she paused. "You will recall, Nicholas, that I said I would send you that letter when all this was over, and it's not over." "It's not?" Nick tilted his head to one side and asked, "When will it be over?" Mrs. Granger smiled and said, Oh, believe me, Nicholas, you'll know when it's over. I wanted to talk to you about something else." She walked across the room and stood 2 feet from him. Nick had grown during the year, and their eyes were almost the same level. Nick noticed that the eyes were softer, but just as powerful. "I've noticed you've been very quiet for the past few months. You know, Nicholas, you didn't do anything wrong this year. I know a lot of things happened and a lot of things were said, and you must have had some difficult days here and there, but your idea was a good idea. I have been very proud of the way you behaved most of the time." Nick was embarrassed, but Mrs. Granger kept on talking. "And Nicholas, you have great things to do in your life. I'm absolutely sure you do, and you mustn't let a few hard days trick you into climbing up." Then Mrs. Granger reached out and shook Nick's hand and looked him in the face. Her eyes were turned up brighter than Nick had ever seen them before. She said, "Nicholas Allen, I have enjoyed having you as a student. Now you go out there and have a wonderful summer, and I expect to hear remarkable things about you, young man." Mrs. Granger watched Nick start to leave, but before he got to the door, he turned and said, "Thanks, Mrs. Granger. You have a great summer too," and then he grinned. "And don't forget to buy some new Frindles for next year." Thanks to this little talk with Mrs. Granger, along with a healthy dose of summer vacation, Nick made a full recovery. He was proud that he had made up a new word, and he enjoyed thinking about all the commotion it had stirred up. That one word had made 5th grade a year to remember. Before he started 6th grade, Nick was Nick again, and all through junior high and high school and college he proved it. For example, 2 years later, all the school cafeterias in town were serving delicious food that at least 4 days a week, all because Nick the consumer. And the state superintendent of schools had made a special trip to Westfield to learn why this little town had the most successful school lunch program in the state. And high school, well, the stories about Nick's other adventures could go on and on and on, but that would delay the end of this story, the one that started when Nick was in 5th grade. Because the end of the story came later, 10 years later. What was happening to Nick's word during those 10 years? Nothing fancy, nothing exciting. Words don't work that way. Words either get used or they don't, and Frindle was being used more and more. It was becoming a real word. And that's the end of chapter 14. Chapter 15 is called "And the Winner Is." Bye, guys.